Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday evening, 9 o'clock, and we are really thrilled to be bringing you Michele Katz from Plus One Adoption tonight. She has a fascinating personal story, but in addition to that, she has founded this wonderful foundation to help individuals and families through all things adoption. And I really can't wait to speak to her. We've gotten so many, hello, Michele. We've gotten so many interesting questions and really thought-provoking comments. And so I'm really, I know people say this a lot and it feels like kind of trite, but I'm actually really excited to have this conversation. So
I'm excited too.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. And it's funny to think back when we first connected over the summer and we're like, yeah, let's do something. And we scheduled, a Zoom for 30 minutes and was definitely over an hour and a half. And we only disconnected because we had to.
Exactly. You and I clearly could be speaking forever. And also the other piece about this, like sort of fortuitousness, is the fact that you and I were scheduled to do a live, I think in September or in October, and
October,
I
right.
had to reschedule on you. And here we are at the beginning of National Adoption Month. So I think it's just, absolutely the right time to do this. In a million ways, it was clear there is a hand, orchestrating all of these different pieces. So, okay, first of all, tell people who you are, and then we'll get into, I want to hear about your story and about what brought you to this, and then about your work, but introduce yourself first, please.
My name's Michele Katz, and I started the Plus One Adoption Foundation not that long ago. It was just this past March. So my inspiration for starting such a foundation really related to my own personal experience with adoption. We're a blended family. I'm married actually 20 years this month to
Mazel tov.
Thank you to my Bashert from who we met in undergrad. And, we were walking across campus one day. We went to Indiana University. And I just said to him, I'd like to adopt a child one day. And, we're 19 years old. And he shrugged his shoulders, and I don't even know if he looked at me. He's like, cool, and we just kept walking. Then we fast forward several years. We did get married, and we wanted to start a family. And we ended up adopting our first child from Colombia, my beautiful Mira, who's now 15 years old. Yeah. And she's amazing child. And then I carried 2 children, and then we ended up adopting our 4th child. I really wanted to adopt again. I got my husband on that game plan, and so we've done 2 Colombian adoptions, and our latest one was in 2019, and we came home December 31st of 2019 from Colombia. We were there for 2 weeks, so we were basically in and out with our daughter. This time, instead our first adoption, we adopted an infant. Mira was only 4 months old. And this time we decided we wanted to go for an older child. And we did. And our little one, she had just turned 8. And we came home with her, never seen snow before. And it's December 31st in Chicago. So you can imagine we had a dusting of snow. And we getting in, it's late at night after 2 flights, after such a whirlwind experience for her. She had never been outside of the city limits of Bogota, Colombia. And I remember her dragging her fingers up the stairs in order to touch it, her first snow, as we walked into the house. And then, of course, the lockdown happened shortly thereafter. But my inspiration for starting Plus One Adoption was that second adoption experience, because we spent time in the orphanage where our daughter had been living, and we really got to know staff and swarm with beautiful children. And I always came with a bag of dum-dums, the little suckers. And so I bring them in, they come swarming at me for this lollipop, you know? And so I'd be passing them out. I mean, it was like Pavlov's dog. I mean, seriously, I'd walk in and they'd come rushing at me. And it was just so amazing to see these children when you know that the best thing for them is to find a permanent loving situation.
Right. Right.
And that there are enough people in the world who would want that. So I saw that there was this gap in education, right? So when we did get home, and because we're an adoptive family and we know other adoptive families, we have several friends that have also adopted children. So there's a community there. But then other people who had not thought about adoption necessarily proactively said to me, you know, I thought about adoption once, and then that was it. Right. So I did see this gap between thinking about it and what do you do next? How do you learn more? And if you search the internet, you're just drowning in information. There's too much information. You don't know what's credible and what's not. So I thought, I think there's something here. And then for those who haven't thought about adoption, maybe it's something to consider as just another item, like in the family planning list. If you want to have kids, throw it on the list as another option.
Yes. Okay, so I want to get into some of the nitty gritty in terms of like practicalities of, you know, what people can do. But before I get to that, I mean, I just have to ask, because, you know, we're in the midst in our community right now. What we'd like to try to do is talk about topics broadly and speak about the emotional aspects, and really try to delve deeply into different topics and give people a sense of what others are going through and what others are considering. And so for some people, as you know, for some people, adoption is a last resort. It's everything they've done to try to have a natural child, and whether that means with their own eggs and sperm, with fertility treatments, without fertility treatments, with, you know, donor egg, donor sperm, donor embryo, whatever they've decided and whatever they could try, they did, and it didn't work. And so now they're considering adoption. And then there's obviously variations on that, you know, on that list. Some people think about adoption in the midst of their family planning, thinking that maybe the treatments are not going to work. So why not explore this as well? But then, so that's, I feel like, one subset of individuals and families. And then on the other hand, you know, and on the other side are people and families like yours who you knew from the very beginning. I don't know about, you know, from when you were 2, but you knew from a very young age that adoption was something that you wanted to pursue, and you wanted to grow your family in this way. And so can you talk a little bit about, like, I know that based on the reading that I've done and the conversation that you and I had, that your foundation is specifically geared, like, you try to think about it more in the second framework of people who are really exploring it and really want to consider this to be an option before they get to that last resort. But the mindset is different. And so can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, mindset is everything. Even if you have tried a lot of things, and we did not escape that either. We went through many different types of treatments. And I can go into some of that as well, but I understand when I read those that are following you, Amy. I mean, I relate to a lot of the posts. I get it. And when you go through adoption and you've been through a lot already, it is important to get your mind right. Because when you are parenting an adopted child, you certainly do not want your child, because they are yours. They are absolutely yours, okay? Then you do not want them to feel as if they are a last resort. That is really important, because they feel what you're giving off. whether, even though you might be saying, I love you, right? They
Yep.
feel that maybe there's some disconnect. It can't, you really need to be ready to take on the project of adoption, because it is a project. You know,
Yep.
IVF has a lot of needles and a lot of unpleasantries, but in adoption, it's paperwork. There is a lot of paperwork. And I've seen some of the posts in preparation for our talk today. Some are myths that I would love to bust tonight if we have time. But
Definitely.
others are very true about having social workers come into your house and ask a lot of questions, and your finances, and things that are personal, why you want to adopt, and these sort of things.
Yeah. So I love the way you said that. I was actually writing it down to be able to talk about it a little later, that at the end of the day, the child that you adopt is your family.
Mm-hmm.
And as with like, it's funny because, I hear just even from personal friends and family members, like we have friends where the youngest child was an oops, right? Or there are, those kids who were told, oh yeah, like they thought they were too old, and then all of a sudden, like, someone got pregnant, right? And they grow up with this narrative of, I wasn't really wanted. And so I think that what you're bringing out right now is a really important concept to make sure that even if adoption was not something that you initially thought about in terms of your own family planning, and it is a last resort, for lack of a better term, at the moment, that it's very important that you don't give that over to your child.
And when you are exploring adoption, that would be something, it's like we hadn't yet thought of adoption, but then someone mentioned adoption to us in an appropriate way. I've been reading those
Right.
stories leading up to today. Yes, that's very important. But if that information is welcomed, right, then it's
Right.
exploratory. Just like when you started looking into any other form, and I've met people who actually don't have the desire to become pregnant. They do want to be parents, but they're not interested in going through pregnancy. So a lot of, what is a pro for someone could be a con for someone else, and vice versa.
Yep.
These are all so personal. And that's also something to keep in mind, is don't yet put it in a column, whether it's pro or con, right? Just learn, right? And then talk to, your significant other, if there's one to discuss with, right? Or a close friend, to talk it out, right? To see if it makes sense, what makes sense for you, whatever it might be. Even if it's donor, surrogacy. I mean, the world of family planning is so large, and we want adoption to be one of those items on the list.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so now let's get into it.
Mm-hmm.
You or a family member has decided, we're not dealing with the comments beforehand, and you should, or you just, or whatever. We're pushing all that aside, right?
Right.
And so someone wants to explore adoption. Walk me through, like, where do you go? How do you figure it out? How do you know? Like, I mean, even simple things like domestic versus international. Like, I'm hearing like all sorts of questions that have been thrown at me, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But like, what do you even do to start?
So often, I mean, I'm seeing this regularly now. People have become aware of what we're doing. They'll contact us. I'll set up a Zoom call, and we'll just talk out, what do you envision? What are you looking for? And some of the questions that I ask back have to do with whether they're willing to travel, or whether they'd rather stay local, or at least domestic, right? And what
Right.
does that mean? What does that mean when it comes to length of time, or finances, or appearance, right? Age.
Yep.
Some people
Yep.
want a baby. I understand that. Other people are no longer interested in having to pack a diaper bag everywhere they go or do bottles, right? Some people are done with that, but they still want to grow their family. And that's okay too. All of it
Yep.
is okay. It's
Yep.
having that initial conversation so that I can help steer the right resources. Because as we talked about on the internet, there is just so much. It's too much. And so we have trusted resources, whether it's in, agencies or consultants. And some consultants will, take your hand and walk you through the whole process through home study, if that term is familiar to some people, right?
I want you to talk a little bit about that in a second, but keep going.
Or there's also consultants who will just have an initial consultation who know the current, temperature as far as, where, domestic versus international. I mean, that's really one of the first questions that we explore. And the reason is because finances, they changed when you're actually having to live outside the country. Most people don't know that perhaps right in your own hometown, or even not in your hometown, you might not want to. There's also reasons not to adopt from your hometown.
Yep.
But nationally, instead of internationally, I can tell you that in Chicago at the DCFS, Department of Child Services here, that they pay you a small stipend. They provide you with cribs and formula if you need it, all these things. So it's not this finance busting experience. But if you travel, naturally, you're living out of the country for some time. There are agency fees and whatnot, right? They are going to actually run these wonderful programs, right? You are not buying children. That's another thing that people misconceive. That's not what's happening here, not at a legitimate program. That's another thing is what's legitimate. That's very hard. You see stories in the news of like the very, very rare occurrence, but they're noteworthy. Not like the thousands and thousands of us who've had like wonderful adoption experiences, but the one that went wrong for whatever reason, those are the ones that make the news for sure.
And so I guess the question is, besides finances, just speaking about, international versus domestic, how does one make that decision? I mean, I mean, in my own extremely, extremely limited knowledge base, just from friends who I know who have adopted, those who have the friends that I have who have explored adoption have explored international options because the timeline was faster, that they potentially could get a baby faster and weren't willing to wait X, that there's a much longer waiting list. And again, like, I don't know if this, I'm guessing that this falls into the myths and, facts and myths type of thing, like that there's a much longer waiting list for someone domestic, and that the domestic babies often have issues, whatever that means. And international babies potentially don't. Like, I'm giving you all of, the things that I've heard in the course of, the random number of years that I've known about this. I mean, can you speak a little bit about that? Because, really the people who are most interested in hearing this information are really the ones that are sort of tiptoeing in and trying to determine if this is even an option for them.
I would say that's a lot to unpack there. So
yes, sorry.
If I forget
unpack whatever you can.
If I forget something though, please remind me. I'm happy to answer.
Yeah.
And all of it. So international typically are older children at this time. Okay. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now. So
and older children means older than
6 and up.
6 and up. Okay.
For a healthy child, 6 and up. And health, that is a continuum. Okay. There are things that are severe and that are things that are not so severe. So I will tell you that my daughter, my eldest, who we adopted as an infant, we wrote down on our application mild delays, whatever, and that So, and mild issues, mild issues.
Yep.
So, and they encourage you to do that. And the reason is that my daughter, when she was born, had jaundice. So she had a low APGAR score in the very beginning. And I am telling you, she is so smart and so healthy, right? But because of that. So it's really important, just, you know, if you get to the point where you're making those kind of decisions as what you're willing to accept, and you always can reject, but at least as far as the referral, it's called a referral when they present information on a child to you, a specific child, then to find out what are the issues that particular orphanage or agency considers mild, medium, severe, okay? But in today's world, okay, now we're fast forwarding because that adoption from my eldest was in 2006, okay? So now we fast forward to today, and the infants, there is a push for domestic families to adopt. So if we adopted in Colombia, there's a push for Colombian families to adopt Colombian children. Okay. So for a healthy child, okay, it's 6 and above, but there are also circumstances if there are issues, and again, that's a wide range, to then it could be younger, or if there's sibling groups. There is a big interest worldwide to keep siblings together for obvious reasons. Right?
Obvious, right.
So that is something, and it's you're not choosing, right? The orphanage, the agencies, they are. But I do have certain connections. Colombia is one of them, of course. We had been with them for, and this is to bust the myth that it's faster for international. It's not necessarily. We had been on the list for some time, maybe a year and a half, and there was like no movement with the Colombian agency we had been working with, which was the same one from our first adoption. Good relationship. I mean, but there was just no movement with that particular orphanage. But the representative who we had in Colombia, who'd been working with, said, I think I have a girl for you, right? Because she's the one she's boots on the ground, right? So she's seeing the kids, and she said, but you'd have to switch over. What does that mean? More paperwork. You know what? I'll do paperwork. That's fine. I'll do the paperwork. And I'm telling you, within several months, we got our referral, and then we were in country. We got the referral. It was beginning of September, and we were in country in the beginning of December or mid-December. Yeah, because we were there for 2 weeks. This is 2019. So it helps having someone who is looking out for your interests, interest.
Right. I mean, and that all speaks to, again, I mean, as with all things in the world, it speaks to building relationships, that as much as you can sort of, you know, get things done and do dot your I's and cross your T's. At the end of the day, so many things are, you know, happen more quickly because of relationships.
Yeah. And not only that, you know, we thought we had something in mind of what we wanted, and it turned out to be different. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It's like, you think today this is what you want, valid, okay? But as you learn and as other opportunities present themselves to you, then it might be worth taking a look, because, you know, she was 8 already. Well, she was 7 at the time, right? But she was turning 8, and so that was older than we were expecting. We were really like on the 6 years, something like that. And you know what? I mean, we couldn't be happier with this match. I mean, she's amazing. She's an amazing girl. It's not that there's no struggle, but I mean, there's struggle with any additional person that you add to your family. Like, there's going to be adjustments, and that's just part of normal. I mean, sometimes it's important to remember, you know, like, is this adoption related? No, no, no. This is just because they're kids and they push buttons and they push limits and they do this and that. Yeah.
Right. Right. Correct. Correct. Okay. So let's go back a little bit. And, like you mentioned home study, you mentioned all of these, applications and all of that. So, where do those things fall in the timeline of this, and talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So that's why the discussion of domestic versus international is extremely important from the get-go, because you just don't go both routes. You make a choice. I've never met anyone who's there's not like an international adoption program. Everything is very jurisdictionally based. Now, I'm used to. I've been practicing law for 20 years, and I'm still practicing. And so, you're very limited in geographic scope if you think of it in that way. So you make this decision, and because the procedures are so different on the international side, you have to look into which countries. Some countries require a certain number of years that you're married. Some don't require that you are. And you've got to kind of figure out, like, I remember going on the internet myself, going through what are the rules for, and I mean, we were looking everywhere because we didn't have guidance.
Right.
Right. That's why I don't want people to have to do that. It's so much work. And then finally we did get connected with a consultant who we met with for 3 to 4 hours, and it created so much clarity for us.
Yep.
I'm not saying we had everything answered, but at least we knew what was important to us. I mean, something that's big to consider is that in the United States, typically adoptions are open, and I'll explain what that means, versus closed. So, I'll use Colombia as an example. So Colombia and most countries outside the United States, there's a certain amount of time to make the decision from birth as to that decision, okay, to place your child for adoption, and then the rights are terminated, you don't go back, and you don't know where the child is placed, even if they're older, even if it's in the situation if the court terminated your rights. The biological family does not know where that child was placed. They don't know if they're in country or outside. Okay. The child is able to obtain their records once they're 18. So I mean, we're very open. I mean, in our family, we're very open about that. My eldest would like to go. I told her I will accompany her. We speak Spanish at home because I didn't want her. I mean, we really made that conscious decision, not required. But as you know, people, language, history, right?
Yes.
Are important.
These are some things actually that we're going to get into over the next few days on the platform and talk about some of these issues. So to help people really try to understand what are some of the concerns that both families have and that the children have as they get older in terms of being integrated into families that are not of the same race or the same country, etc. So yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but keep going.
What were you talking about?
No, just about like you made a conscious decision to speak Spanish in your home because you wanted to make it comfortable for your daughter.
Right. And I thought it's very important. Well, Spanish is a very, that's a very useful language living in the United States. And my husband and I always wanted to raise the children with a second language, at least. Right. Yep. Of course, they're also learning, they're all learning Hebrew, of course, as well, in our family. So that was all to say, though, about the closed versus open. That's what we were talking about. And so, while it's closed, it's temporarily closed. And what's good for the child as far as, if they're starting to ask questions, which happens, And it's really interesting because when I talk to my friends who also have adopted children, it's age 7. I don't know what it
Oh,
is, but at
interesting.
age 7, they start asking questions, and it was like clockwork. Okay.
Wow.
Something developmentally. And she started asking questions. I don't want it to be a secret because it doesn't do her any good. We want her to be,
Right.
have a strong sense of identity. And being adopted is part of her story. And it
Of
certainly,
course.
maybe because, we live in a different time now. I don't think adoption has the same stigma, certainly not in a big city like I live in.
Yep.
But I mean, we even attend a camp every summer for adoptees and their
Wow.
siblings
Wow.
right? So
Wow.
you see these kids running around. They're the majority for this week. One
Amazing.
week a year. But it's like
Yep.
amazing how they connect and how they talk about their stories and stuff. And they're very excited about it. My eldest says,
Amazing.
she's like, Mom, I'm good with being adopted.
So
Seriously,
great.
that was not provoked. I don't know, but that's what she said, right?
Right.
So nature, nurture, I don't know. They look like you, they
Right.
don't look like you. I don't know.
Right.
They're yours. That's
Yep.
and it's then again, as parents, it's our responsibility, right? To kind of mind what's going on with them, right? And
Yep.
to help them where we can develop into, strong, independent people.
Exactly. Exactly. So, so to go back, when I, so we were talking about, paperwork. It's, initially sort of the decision is domestic versus international. Then, there are, there are lots of different paperwork to make decisions. You have to decide which country is appropriate, you as a family, and I'm guessing, with yourself and or other consultants, the decisions are thought about in terms of how old you're willing to, accept, and, what kind of physical health, disability, etc. And so at what point does the investigation into, your own life and your home study, like, what are they really looking for? What do they care about? Like, when they're doing this, like, at what point does that happen, and why is it important?
I think that people adopt in a very full range of situations. There may be one parent home, or there may be both working, or a single parent working. And so I think that adoption is available for like a broad spectrum. I don't think it matters if you're in a house or an apartment, like your financial. I think there needs to be stability, financial
Right.
stability. Like that would be beneficial to any child, right?
Right.
To be in a home with that situation, right? I think it's very it could feel very intrusive. That's possible for some
Right.
people. They might feel, or it might be like you get to know your social worker and you're cool with it. So
Right.
different personalities. I know with our social workers that we've worked with over the years for both of the adoptions we did, it was very amicable. I mean, we worked with really hardworking people that tried to move quickly and efficiently, and were there as our cheerleader and our investigator, right? And so what I mean
Right.
by that is if you are, if you have a, so, and it's kind of, again, it depends on what route you go. If you want to have you can work with a consultant, right? As I mentioned, there is the kind where they will walk you through, and they have various packages at different price points.
Yep.
And or you can work with an agency, maybe less, not as won't feel as private necessarily,
Right.
someone who's got maybe a bigger caseload type of thing.
Right.
And they'll also be working with you, but it might require you to do a little bit more legwork, or maybe not. In personalities, what works best for you. I mean, there are
Right.
there are people who are running businesses who are legitimate, and they will help you through the process, and they will help match you with a child. Like if we're talking about a domestic, they have their ear on it. They have connections, right? And then there are agencies you can work with, or you can work with an attorney. You can, like I said, you can call DCFS in your city or in out of state, right? There's so many different ways to do it, which is why we recommend having a talk about, you know, what works for you. And we haven't, you know, open. So we talked about closed adoption and very detailed about what that is, but open adoption is very common in the United States. So a lot of people like to, if they're not comfortable with that, they're like, I'm not babysitting this. I mean, their thought process could be, you know, I'm not babysitting this. This is like my child. And is that confusing for the child to come in and out of their life? Okay, so just to spend a little moment on open, because I think we can do some myth busting on that. There is a range on open. Open could be, it could just be one-sided, right? So it could be every year you send a holiday card with pictures, right, of your child, okay, to send updates. But then on the other extreme, yes, there are certainly situations where the biological family maybe comes over for dinner, maybe, you know, there's like a relationship. There is a relationship, and maybe it's not the biological parents, okay? It could be a grandparent or an uncle or somebody, you know, because, you know, there's different circumstances for, you know, that lead to the placement of a child for adoption.
Right. I'm imagining like a teenage mother or something like that, you know, is not ready to have a child and so wants to give the child up for that. That's just the first example that comes to mind.
Sure. And that's quite common. But there are also families who can't manage another child, who might be married and had a child unplanned, and they cannot care for yet another child. So there's many different circumstances, of course. And when people have asked me, it's a common question. So how do you decide like where in the open continuum? It's a conversation. It's something that you don't have to necessarily have that discussion directly with the birth mother, but someone would, a liaison, right? Whether it is the agency or the consultant or attorney or whatever the case may be. No matter what, though, there is that home study that gets done. So what is that? Okay, so the social worker comes to your house. It's questions. It's conversation. It's why do you want to adopt? What, you know, where would the room be, for example? Like, how do you imagine? You know, they talk a little bit about that. They'll also, I don't know if they still do this, but when we adopted I remember they checked the water temperature, like things like that. And you're like, what, really? I don't actually know that they do that one anymore, but they did with I don't recall that with the second adoption, but they did with our first one. So some things are kind of like, okay, you need a license essentially to be a parent. Who knew? I mean, essentially that's what it is. If you think of it that way, like a license to drive. I mean, you know, in some cases, you know, you might think like, well, geez, maybe that would be a great requirement. Right? Totally. But of course. Totally. But yeah, so I know that there can be sometimes some resentment. And it's okay to have those feelings. Like any feeling you're having, like that's valid, you know. It is someone coming into your house and deciding whether you you know, are good enough to be a parent. Right. Okay. So that is the reality of it, but it's also your mindset, and being like, you know what, this is just a part of the process. And maybe it's great that they have something in place to make sure that when a child is placed in your home, that it is a safe place it's a stable environment, a loving environment, and it's being done for the right reasons.
Right.
Right.
Right. Okay, so to close out this conversation, I'd love to get back as you were speaking a little bit before about sort of these myths that people have about adoption. What are some other big ones that you commonly hear that you just like are just wrong, and that you really you'd love to be able to share with this audience so that they shouldn't be scared off of considering adoption as part of their lives?
I think one of the ones I hear about the most is about the finances. It doesn't have to be expensive, so I do want to bust that myth right now. And then also, like, when people
tell me, okay, besides just saying it doesn't have to be expensive, can you give like a ballpark range? I mean, no one's going to hold you to it, but just a sense of like what exactly we're talking about.
So if you're adopting locally from your DCFS, you're actually getting a stipend. So you would have maybe some attorney's fees. They're not going to be that expensive. I mean, maybe $1,500 to $5,000. I don't know, to go through all the paperwork and go before the judge. I mean, even my Colombian adoptions, we also did U.S. adoptions after that, so that they're like totally mine. You know what I mean? Like not just there, but here. And we did that, and so you get a range there. If you're doing something domestic, or you're using a consultant, there's going to be agency fees. So you might be talking, 5, 10. If you do maybe private, could be more. But I mean, this is something. I mean, you're adding like a person to your family. So you want to use credible people. So I'd be wary about just like going on the internet to find somebody without referral, prior client comments or from a credible source, because you don't want to get scammed. Because unfortunately, we're vulnerable. People are vulnerable and trusting. So there's that. On the international side, that's going to be more. Fees in itself could be about $10K, maybe and maybe more. They're usually done in different sections, so it's not necessarily all at the same time. So you've got to get through this part of the process. Then there's fees for this part of the process, right? And then the living expenses, unless you've got maybe lots of points or someplace, right? There is a whole industry, though, that caters to adoption in certain countries. So with our first adoption, we stayed at a bed and breakfast with other families who adopted. It was there are certain places, which was wonderful. We're still friends with those families we lived with our first adoption. We are still very close to some of those families. So, and the kids are close. So when you're talking about identity and that close connection, I mean, my daughter has that connection with those families, as do my other kids. My other kids do too. Through the years, they have continued that relationship, even though they don't live in Chicago. Then I would say they're yours. When people say,
there's another myth. Yeah, keep going.
It's another myth. Like, don't think no. You are the parents. You are the parent or parents. Absolutely. It shouldn't be thought of as any other way, right? You are the one who's cared for them. You've taken them to their doctor's appointments. You've helped them with their homework, runny noses, all that stuff, tooth fairy, all of it, right?
Vomiting in the middle of the night. Yes, we all know.
Yes. The big worries and the little worries belong to you. You are their parents. So
amazing. Okay, two questions that we've gotten here. One is, so let me see if it'll show up. Okay, yeah. What's the dynamic like when you have both biologic and adopted children in the family? So can you speak to, I mean, you specifically are, the perfect person to ask about that. How is it?
So it's kind of funny in our house. We forget. My eldest is, she was first. She was first on the scene. My second child didn't come till almost 4 years later. And so, you know, it's like she is next to me, right? She's like queen of this castle.
Totally.
I think that we don't really differ too much. Also, all the kids speak Spanish, and like all four of them do. So it's not as if like only the Colombians we taught Spanish. You know
right.
what I mean?
Right.
So
right.
they all have that in common. They all go to that adoption camp. So it's like this. It's so we're Ashkenazi. Okay, that's our heritage. That's our daughter's heritage also, even though maybe not genetically. Even though it turns out that my eldest does have 1%. She is 1% Ashkenazi. We found out from the genetic testing. But that aside, we see that Colombian heritage is also part of ours. So it's just kind of like a meld. You know what I mean? So we're all kind of we're all of each other's stuff. So between the difference, not in our family, we don't see that too much. I can tell you, even my second child, who was not adopted, he did ask at some point, why does Mira live with us if she's Colombian? He did ask this. He's very little, okay? And people must have been talking, right? There must have been, you know, he's trying to process. So kids do process, and of course they ask you these questions at like the most random times and really opportune times where you're not sitting here, you know, able to think about it. And so my first reaction is like, what are you talking about? That's your sister, blah, 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 blah.
Totally.
And then I calm myself down, right? And then I was like, because she's part of our family. She's part of our family, and we live in Chicago. So
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Okay, let me, so someone is asking a question about domestic infant adoption. Can you speak a little bit about that?
About domestic infant adoption?
Is that, how difficult is that? I think that my guess is that's the root of the question.
So I hope I get the intended question. A lot of birth mothers request a book. Okay, so it's called a birth mother book. And if you want to adopt domestically and you are looking for a baby who is not yet born, typically, okay, then the birth mother book is reviewed by birth mothers, okay, and they choose the couple. And I know people who have been chosen fly if it's not local. And they get essentially interviewed. It's very interesting process. And you want to be you. You definitely, you want to be you. There's a variety of pictures that are included in these books. So it could be do it like on vacation or with other family and friends, right? Your consultant will guide you, and they will, and the agencies as well, they will help you put together this book.
Wow. So it's really, it's essentially the birth mother has a file or a book basically on each prospective family, and then makes the decision as to whom to interview is what you're saying.
Yes, but there's also things like, and we might be doing a live, we're looking into it with Pear Tree, the founder of Pear Tree, if you've heard of that.
I haven't. What is Pear Tree? And just tell everyone.
Imagine it is a software program, right? Where you become a member and you can actually communicate with birth mothers and birth mothers with prospective parents. And there is, I had a Zoom call a couple weeks ago with the founder, and really inspiring. Her story is very inspiring, and what led her to start what she's doing, which I believe she's now doing full time. Sound familiar to you?
Very familiar.
Yes. And so it's a way to communicate, basically like a matching program, but imagine like internet dating. kind of like that concept where you get to meet people and connect and see if it's a match.
Yep.
Is very interesting. And so that's another thing that would be interesting to look at. As far as other kind of kids that are already born, there might be, that's, you know, the children may be, they may be a product of the state or they may not. So it's the agencies and the consultants that, you know, would help to connect you with, you know, potential opportunities to adopt there as well.
Got it. Okay, 2 more quick questions. Can you talk about, you know, I guess, you know, for your older daughter, she was adopted when she was an infant. So the kinds of, the question really is, how do you, as an adoptive parent, how do you manage and handle the trauma or the experience of the child, you know, being moved from their natural location, from their birth mothers and or from an orphanage to a different country, different culture, different everything. And obviously, like with any, you know, with any person being moved and having to be acclimated into a family, you know, how do you, I'm assuming there are, and we've spoken about some of this already, there are networks of parents and discussion groups, I'm sure, and how best practices and so on and so forth. But when you're dealing, especially with your second child, who was adopted, your second daughter, she was already 8 and came as a person, not as a baby. And so
very
what does
different.
that look like? Right.
Yeah,
what does that look like? Right.
So when you're talking about infants, yes, it is thought to be trauma. I mean, if you think about the smells that a infant has in the womb, you know, outside the womb, and then all of a sudden there are different smells, you know, that is traumatic. And we personally haven't exhibited any of that issue with our eldest, but I will tell you that whenever she has a question, I answer it. Anything we might know about biological family, you know, we answer. And we make things available to her from her file that we do have whenever she wants it. Can she keep it in her room? No. She tore pages out of books as a child. So we will not have her disrupting any of these very important papers. And she understands that. And she did here and there as a child, she would ask and we'd reinforce. This is why, because we need to make sure that it stays in, it's very important that it stays in very good condition for your life. Okay.
Right.
Then you move over to adopting an older child. Okay. Different, very different, because, well, one, we didn't have a severe language barrier because we speak Spanish, but it certainly wasn't, you know, the same fluidity as, you know, a native speaker. Yep. So, and other families may not have any working knowledge of the child's language, home language. Right. So that can be a challenge. Yes. We didn't have so much of that, luckily, but, and I did have a dictionary also to like, mommy doesn't know this word. Let's look it up. You know, I would tell her in Spanish. Okay. Vamos a buscar. Okay. And then I would look it up. It's great having the app, right? It's super easy.
Totally.
Now,
totally.
But with other things, I mean, like you said, she has been plucked out of all she knows, which was a very small perimeter, right? Now she is in a new country, new weather, new food, new language, you know, because like the extended family doesn't speak Spanish. Okay.
Right.
So, you know, this is all very new. So what did we do? We started introducing people slowly into her life. Okay. Because this was before the pandemic. So breakfast or lunch, dinner, small groups of people to come meet her. We did not do some huge party. Come meet our new child. No. We didn't do that. Okay. Then we had the lockdown. In a sense, that was great. Okay. From the standpoint that we could really spend time working on the interpersonal relationships, not just between her and us as her new parents, but between the siblings. And let's not forget, that the baby who had been a baby for many years was moved into a different position. So you're dealing with these other, there's a lot going on here, okay? Whether you birth a child or whether they come to you another.
Totally.
Now, there's certain therapies that we did do, and I think this is important because TheraPlay was very helpful in attachment. Now, attachment, and we talk about it on our Instagram feed a lot because it's so important. Children learn attachment. We all learn attachment from our loving, secure environments. I'm sure we all have friends we know who did not have such an environment growing up, and they might make some questionable decisions about various things like partners, whatnot. So it's so important. So there is a kind of therapy that we did. We did it in Colombia. They actually do it there at the orphanage. It's like they have a full-time staff person who works on TheraPlay.
Wow.
With the kids there.
Tell me, just to be clear, it's called TheraPlay?
Yes. TheraPlay, one word. Okay. And we would, we did it online once we were locked down, but beforehand we would go to the office of the therapist. And I went on my own with my child, and then my husband went on his own with our daughter. And so that we would develop our own attachment with different activities. So that's what you're doing. It is exactly what it is therapy, but it is play-based therapy. So you are doing different activities and for an hour or so, okay? There is touching involved. There was this one where you take a lotion and you actually she would put it on me and then rub it on my hand, and then I would do the same and rub it on her hand, like that. There were all different kinds of activities. The one that she really loved was putting her in a blanket. I was on one side, the therapist was on the other, and we lifted up the blanket with her in it, okay, like a hammock. And we would rock her like a baby, okay? Wow. We would rock her like a baby because some of these children have not gone through the stages that are, that if they started with you, that they would have had. So they may have skipped stages, and kids need to go through the stages. I've learned, even if they're 8 years old. Right. So in the beginning, I was feeding her. We went through these stages pretty quickly because we were really doing the attachment. Right. But so that idea of like the sippy cup and all that, no diapers, thankfully we didn't have that. but still, some of those other kind of things we did go through, and we don't feed her now. But I'm saying in the beginning we would actually feed her, and that is normal. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Beautiful. Look, I think that, the last question here was more talking about open adoptions, but, you've covered that already. I think, look, as you and I know, you and I could talk for hours on this subject and probably really any subject. And I'm just so grateful to you for giving us a small window into into what this kind of experience would be like for someone who's considering it. I think it's, we're not going to be able to cover everything, and we're not going to be able to cover specific things that children may have gone through before, someone gets them as a parent. We're not going to be able to cover, hundreds of other topics. And I think that this is, if people want more information, they can always reach out to you afterwards and get more information. But this gives them a really good window into the different things that someone would go through. And I'm so grateful for your time and your knowledge and your expertise here. So really, we're just so appreciative.
It's my pleasure. And, Plus One Adoption Foundation is here. So if your question didn't get answered, you need follow-up, or you're curious as to what the next step would be for you, then definitely contact us.
Perfect. What is the best way for people to find you? Instagram, website, does it matter? How do you want people to reach out?
Instagram is easy. The website is also, basically it sends us an email through the
Great.
website. You can do that. So either way, whatever is comfortable for you.
Great. Okay, Michele, thank you so much. I mean, you've opened my eyes to so much, and I know so many people appreciate this live. It is just so invaluable. And may you continue to be this beacon of light. I mean, you are a tremendous example for, you know, the community at large, the Jewish community at large, to just show how it can be done, and how, yes, the process is not easy, but it can be done. There are people there to help. There are systems in place, and there are groups and other, you know, other different, the camps like that you mentioned, things I hadn't even considered before, but that there is so much out there and support out there for parents or individuals. I shouldn't say parents or individuals. I should say individuals or couples who are choosing to embark on this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and it's great to see you again. And I'm looking forward to the next time we can connect.
We will do it. We will definitely do it. Okay. Good night, everybody. If you want to reach out to Michele or anyone at Plus One Adoption, through their website or through Instagram. And in the meantime, we're going to wish all of you good night. Bye-bye.
Oh, good night.